11:23 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, January 18th, 2026. The oil tanker Pacific Fortune, carrying 2 million barrels of Venezuelan crude bound for Texas refineries, suddenly changed course. Not toward the Gulf of Mexico, toward Shanghai. Within hours, maritime tracking systems showed systematic redirection across global shipping lanes. The Arabian Star diverted from Louisiana to Rotterdam. Caspian Navigator rerouted from Florida to Singapore. Atlantic Pioneer switched from New York to Hamburg. 200 million barrels of crude oil that was destined for American markets disappeared from U.S.-bound shipping manifests and reappeared on routes toward Asia and Europe. But here's what makes this redirection historically significant. It wasn't market-driven adjustment or logistical optimization. Leaked shipping documents reveal coordinated instructions from governments and energy companies across multiple continents, all implementing the same strategy: systematic energy trade redirection away from American markets. This has happened before, twice in recorded history. Same pattern, same devastating outcome. And the oil tanker diversions represent something far more significant than supply chain disruption. They're confirmation that global maritime commerce is reorganizing around the same principle that fragmented Roman grain networks and collapsed British trade dominance. When empires seize resources through military force, global commerce responds by routing around imperial markets. Not gradually, not through diplomatic process. Immediately and systematically. While mainstream media focuses on diplomatic tensions and military operations, the tanker diversions reveal something that only becomes visible when you understand historical trade patterns. This isn't about Venezuelan politics or regional energy security. This is about what happens when empires discover that taking resources by force converts reliable trading partners into systematic competitors who redirect commerce toward more stable relationships. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand exactly what the oil tanker route changes represent, why they were mathematically predictable, and what historical precedent tells us happens when global trade networks reorganize around imperial avoidance. Because there's a pattern here, a sequence of military action and commercial reaction that no empire has ever reversed once it begins. The tankers have changed course, the networks are reorganizing. The only question is whether you'll recognize what the maritime realignment actually represents. Every empire in recorded history discovers the same truth when they transition from commercial resource relationships to military seizure. Taking resources by force converts trading partners into competitors, and competitors always respond by organizing alternative networks that exclude imperial markets. Not diplomatic protest, not economic sanctions. Systematic trade redirection designed to demonstrate that empires dependent on global commerce become vulnerable when they make commerce unreliable through military force. Rome learned this with Mediterranean grain routes. Britain learned this with global shipping networks. And America is learning this with oil tanker diversions. The pattern never changes because maritime mathematics never change. 3rd century Rome controlled Mediterranean grain trade through military presence at key ports. Roman fleets escorted grain ships from Egypt to Italian markets. Roman administrators managed harbor operations across the inland sea. Roman currency purchased grain supplies at below-market prices, enforced through naval intimidation. The system worked until currency debasement made Roman payments increasingly worthless. Egyptian merchants began preferring trade with other provinces, offering better terms. Roman response was predictable: increased military control of shipping and forced grain requisitions. Mediterranean commerce retaliated systematically. Grain ships bound for Roman ports began changing course toward Gaul, Hispania, and other provinces. Not reduced shipments to Rome. Complete redirection of shipping toward alternative markets offering stable currency and commercial relationships. Within months, Roman ports experienced systematic grain shortages despite maintaining naval supremacy. Military power couldn't force ships to sail toward markets they wanted to avoid. Administrative control couldn't create trade relationships when merchants preferred dealing with more reliable partners. The grain shipping crisis revealed that Roman commercial dominance was completely dependent on voluntary cooperation from traders who had lost all incentive to cooperate. Port activity in Rome declined 70% within 2 years. Alternative trade networks expanded rapidly between provinces that offered stable currency and predictable commercial relationships. The Mediterranean economy reorganized around Roman avoidance rather than Roman inclusion. Maritime trade redirection didn't just create supply shortages. It demonstrated that naval supremacy couldn't maintain commerce when traders systematically avoided imperial markets. 18th century Britain controlled global shipping through naval dominance and commercial advantages. British ports processed majority of international trade. British currency was preferred for maritime transactions. British shipping companies managed global supply routes. The system functioned until currency manipulation and forced resource extraction made British markets increasingly unreliable for international traders. Merchant companies began exploring alternative ports and payment methods. British response followed imperial pattern. increased naval control, and forced commercial relationships. Global shipping retaliated comprehensively. Trade routes that had flowed through London for generations began reorganizing around Amsterdam, Hamburg, and other European ports. Ships carrying valuable cargo started avoiding British harbors entirely. Maritime intelligence from the period shows systematic redirection of global shipping away from British ports toward alternative networks offering more stable commercial relationships and better terms. British naval supremacy couldn't force ships to dock at ports they wanted to avoid. Commercial regulations couldn't create trade relationships when international merchants preferred dealing with more reliable partners. The shipping crisis exposed British dependence on voluntary cooperation from global traders for systems they thought they controlled through naval force. Port activity in London declined substantially. Alternative trade networks expanded rapidly between continental European ports that offered stable currency and predictable commercial relationships. Global commerce reorganized around British avoidance rather than British centrality. Naval dominance couldn't replace commercial attractiveness when traders had alternatives that offered better terms and greater reliability. Two examples, two different eras, identical pattern, identical outcome. Military control of resources always triggers commercial redirection away from imperial markets. And commercial redirection always reveals imperial dependence on voluntary cooperation from traders who no longer have any incentive to cooperate. Now let me show you how oil tanker diversions follow this exact historical pattern. America controlled global energy trade through commercial advantages and currency acceptance for decades. American ports processed enormous volumes of international oil trade. Dollar-denominated transactions were standard for energy commerce. American refineries represented preferred destinations for global oil suppliers. The system worked through mutual benefit and stable commercial relationships. Energy suppliers received reliable payments and trusted currency. American markets offered consistent demand and competitive pricing. Military seizure of Venezuelan facilities changed everything. Global oil companies recognized that commercial relationships with America could be replaced by military occupation when convenient. Energy suppliers began questioning reliability of trading partners who seize facilities rather than maintain commercial agreements. The tanker diversions represent systematic commercial response to American resource seizure, not random market adjustment. Coordinated redirection designed to demonstrate that global energy commerce can function independently of American markets when those markets become unreliable through military force. Maritime tracking data shows 200 million barrels diverted from American ports toward Asian and European destinations within 72 hours. That's not logistical optimization. That's systematic implementation of predetermined alternative routing plans. Leaked shipping manifests reveal coordinated instructions from national oil companies across multiple continents. Saudi Aramco diverted shipments toward Chinese ports. Russian Rosneft redirected supplies toward European markets. Nigerian NNPC rerouted shipments toward Asian refineries. All implementing the same strategy. Demonstrate that global oil trade can organize around American avoidance when America makes commercial relationships unreliable through military seizure. The diversions expose American dependence on voluntary cooperation from global energy suppliers for systems America thought it controlled through military presence and currency dominance. But the tanker route changes represent something more significant than energy supply adjustment. They are confirmation that global maritime commerce is implementing the exact response pattern that fragmented imperial trade networks throughout history. Oil tankers changing course mid-journey aren't experiencing navigation problems. They're demonstrating that global energy commerce has alternative routing options when imperial markets become unreliable through military resource seizure. American ports, losing 200 million barrels of scheduled deliveries, aren't facing temporary supply disruption. They're experiencing the first stage of systematic commercial redirection that always follows imperial resource wars. Refineries suddenly discovering supply shortages aren't dealing with market volatility. They're learning that global energy networks can reorganize around imperial avoidance when empires make commerce unreliable through military force. The mathematics are unforgiving. Energy independence through military seizure becomes energy dependence on fewer suppliers who understand their enhanced leverage and prefer trading with more reliable partners. This is exactly what happened to Rome when grain shipping reorganized around Roman avoidance. Exactly what happened to Britain when global commerce developed alternative networks that excluded British ports. The pattern doesn't change because commercial incentives don't change. Traders prefer stable relationships with reliable partners over uncertain relationships with partners who seize facilities when commercial terms become inconvenient. But the leaked shipping documents reveal something that should concern anyone paying attention to historical patterns. The tanker diversions were planned months in advance through coordination between national oil companies and alternative port facilities. Document NSC 2024-234 from previous leaks mentioned replication methodology for resource security operations in multiple theaters. The maritime response suggests global energy companies took that planning seriously and developed alternative routing systems to avoid dependence on American markets. China expanded port capacity for Venezuelan oil months before the facility seizures began. European refineries negotiated supply agreements with Middle Eastern producers, specifically designed to bypass American distribution networks. Asian trading companies established alternative payment systems for energy transactions that avoid dollar-based settlement. The tanker diversions weren't reactive, they were implementation of predetermined plans developed by energy companies and governments that recognized American resource seizures would make commercial relationships unreliable. Global energy commerce spent months preparing systematic alternatives to American markets. The Venezuela operation simply triggered implementation of plans that were already complete. This represents the same strategic preparation that characterized Mediterranean trade redirection during Roman grain wars and global shipping reorganization during British commercial decline. Smart commercial interests always develop alternatives when they recognize that imperial behavior is becoming unpredictable and potentially threatening to normal business relationships. The tanker route changes aren't surprising to anyone who understands maritime commercial history. They're confirmation that global energy trade has implemented the exact response pattern that fragmented imperial commerce throughout recorded history. But there's something more fundamental revealed by the shipping diversions. They demonstrate that America no longer offers commercial advantages that make traders prefer American markets over available alternatives. Real commercial dominance means traders compete for access to your markets because you offer the best terms, most reliable relationships, and strongest currency. When traders start developing alternatives and implementing systematic avoidance, you've lost commercial attractiveness that sustained dominance. America chose military seizure because commercial relationships were already deteriorating through currency debasement and unreliable policy changes. The tanker diversions confirm that global energy commerce has developed better alternatives and no longer needs American markets for profitable operations. Oil companies don't redirect 200 million barrels away from established supply chains unless alternative destinations offer superior terms and greater reliability. The mathematics are clear. Energy suppliers now prefer dealing with partners who maintain commercial relationships rather than seize facilities when trade terms become inconvenient. Chinese ports offer yuan-denominated transactions that avoid dollar exposure. European refineries provide stable demand without military seizure risk. Asian trading companies maintain predictable commercial relationships without facility occupation threats. Global energy commerce has better options than American markets that have become unreliable through military resource seizure. The tanker diversions aren't temporary adjustment. They're permanent reorganization toward trading partners that offer superior commercial relationships and greater predictability. Every ship changing course away from American ports confirms that global energy trade has developed alternatives that are preferable to dealing with partners who seize facilities rather than maintain commercial agreements. Maritime tracking systems show continuing redirection as more oil companies implement plans to reduce dependence on American markets that have proven unreliable through military force. The shipping pattern is accelerating rather than stabilizing. More tankers diverted away from U.S. ports every day as energy suppliers recognize the advantages of trading with partners who maintain commercial relationships rather than seize facilities. Alternative port capacity in Asia and Europe is expanding rapidly to accommodate redirected energy flows. Investment capital is flowing toward infrastructure that supports trade networks independent of American markets. Global energy commerce is systematically organizing around American avoidance, not through diplomatic protest or economic sanctions, through quiet commercial redirection that demonstrates American markets are no longer necessary for profitable energy trade. The historical pattern is absolute. Imperial resource seizure triggers commercial redirection. Commercial redirection reveals imperial dependence on voluntary cooperation. Lost cooperation accelerates systematic trade reorganization around imperial avoidance. Rome discovered this when Mediterranean grain routes reorganized around more reliable partners. Britain learned this when global shipping networks developed alternatives to British ports. The oil tanker diversions confirm America is experiencing the same commercial isolation that destroyed imperial trade dominance throughout history. 200 million barrels redirected in 72 hours represents the largest maritime energy realignment in recorded history. Not temporary market adjustment, permanent network reorganization away from markets that have become unreliable through military force. The tankers changed course because the mathematics changed. American markets no longer offer commercial advantages sufficient to overcome seizure risk and relationship uncertainty. Global energy trade has better alternatives. The shipping routes are confirming this through systematic redirection that accelerates rather than slows, as more companies recognize the benefits of avoiding American markets. The pattern doesn't care about American military superiority or naval dominance. It doesn't require permission or diplomatic process. It unfolds through commercial mathematics, like trade flows, like history. The oil tanker diversions confirm what sophisticated maritime observers predicted months ago. America has triggered the exact commercial response that fragmented imperial trade networks throughout recorded history. The shipping routes aren't changing temporarily. They're reorganizing permanently around partners that maintain commercial relationships rather than seize facilities when trade terms become inconvenient. Every tanker changing course away from American ports represents confirmation that global energy commerce has developed better alternatives and no longer considers American markets necessary for profitable operations. The maritime realignment isn't beginning. It's confirming that imperial commercial dominance has ended and global trade networks are systematically organizing around more reliable partnerships. The tankers reveal the truth that empires always discover too late. Military power cannot replace commercial attractiveness when traders have alternatives that offer better terms and greater reliability. The shipping lanes have spoken, history has repeated, the pattern has reached its predictable conclusion. Maritime commerce doesn't negotiate with empires that seize resources. It simply routes around them toward partners that maintain stable commercial relationships. The oil tankers changed course because the world changed. And the world changed the moment America chose military seizure over commercial relationship. The diversions confirm it, the networks prove it, the mathematics demand it.